So I was playing cards with my kids recently, and I found myself in a bit of an internal struggle. There was part of me that wanted to let them win, particularly one of them who takes losses pretty hard. My kids like playing cards, and they deal with the big feelings around them differently. One of them gets real high on the highs and real low on the lows, and the other kind of plays it cool and doesn't show too much, but you can see it all happening on the inside. So I'm sitting there with them, and there's a part of me that's thinking, let them enjoy this, let them have the win. And there's another part of me that's thinking about how to fake them out so that I can completely crush them. A little feint here, a little deceit there, and then get all the matches. And it got me thinking about this part of the mind that wants to win, to beat the competition, to come out on top, even when it's a 7 and a 5-year-old and you're playing Go Fish. That's what I want to talk about tonight, that part of the mind. And we could think of competition in an acute sense, like a card game or the Knicks versus the Spurs kind of thing, a discrete head-to-head conflict. But it's also seeped into the fabric of our society. Maybe all societies, I don't know, but certainly this one. I was thinking about it at different stages of life. Several years ago, I was sitting around talking with a group of friends who were from all different parts of the country, and we were talking about the sort of social pecking order in high school and who was the alpha, who was winning the kind of social competition. In a lot of regions, it's the football players, right? Those types of athletes who are not just athletic, but also large and strong. There was a kid from a small school in California who said the water polo players were at the top of the pecking order. The kid from Hawaii naturally said the surfers. And then we looked at the kid from New York and we're like, you guys don't even have athletic fields or, anything like that. Who, certainly, maybe the kids in the Rockaways surf, but the rest of you, not a chance. And he said, oh, come on, the best dressed, right? So every region, right? Every high school has this built-in sense of competition, and we know who's winning. We know who's on top, and we know who's on bottom. In adulthood, one of the more common denominators in the society for the rules of the game is money. I knew a family well where whoever was making the most money became the de facto matriarch or patriarch, but in this case, it was a matriarch. And people were explicit about it. We listen to her because she makes the most money. That sort of conferred a wisdom and a power and an authority. She was the boss. She was the top dog. And I think even our society works this way, right? We have not infrequently sort of elevated people to positions of power whose claim often rests on their capacity to make money or at least just be rich. Now, sometimes it's a little gauche to flaunt your wealth, and people find subtler ways of doing it. But even in those parts of society, you can still feel it, right? There are little tells, there are little ways of showing that one's doing well. I remember reading Michael Lewis's The Big Short, and one of the Wall Street bankers he talks to says, it's not about the money, it's about the money, right? It's about that feeling of making the most. In some families, it's the name of the college, the type of major, the name of the company that you work for, your kid works for, the title of the job, the access or proximity to power. Those are all ways of winning. Some places it's the trophies, the awards, the honors. Probably in most places, at least to some degree, it's the shape of the body, the physical attributes of beauty. And then you come to spiritual communities, and all of a sudden the rules get flipped, and the name of the game is piety. Who can be the most pious? Who can care the least about these things, or at least pretend to? Who can be the most humble? Who can have the meditative accomplishments? Like that line in The Big Lebowski where John Goodman turns to Jeff Bridges and says, "Calmer than you are, dude." Right? Like that kind of a... Chogyam Trungpa, a meditation teacher in the Tibetan tradition, actually titled one of his books, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. He was really talking about this, that you can just trade that whole set of winning rules in society for a new set in a spiritual community. Wearing the flowy pants, speaking with that Northern California cadence, right? You know, it's just another way of trying to win. So what do you do with this? This persistent, nagging part of the mind that wants to put us on top. Well, the first thing you do is you recognize that it has a value. Competition has a place in our biology. It arouses energy that can be highly productive, right? It can motivate us, it can push us forward, it can get us to notice things we need to see. It can lead us to work harder, think more creatively, and even sometimes have some fun, right? Some of those acute competitions can be a hoot. So it's not all bad, and it's baked into us, right? It is one of the foundational cornerstones of our theory of biology. There it is. So it's not going away. One thing you can't do with it is kill it. It's here. So recognizing that competition is here to stay, we have to consider how to work with this energy skillfully. What do we do in a world where species are competing against species, groups against groups, people against people? How do we as humans handle this in a way so that it doesn't hurt us and hurt the people around us? I have this very distinct memory as a kid. I was incredibly competitive, but also very emotionally dysregulated. And so I couldn't handle it. I would be in a PE baseball game in third grade and like screaming at some girl who missed, like a fly ball or a ground ball. And, everybody's looking at me like, dude, like, well, it's just a game. Like half these people don't even want to be here, and you're yelling at everybody. And I felt, I could feel it. I was wrong. I was off. I knew there was some shame to it. And so I made a decision at some point. I realized it was turning me into a sort of social outcast and not winning me a lot of friends. And I remember thinking in my head, I'm not allowed to take this too seriously. And so it started this funny inner conflict from that point forward where that part of me still was there. It still wanted to win, but there was another part of me saying, play it cool, don't go too hard. It's just a game, man. Chill out. Right? It kind of got me all knotted up inside. Not that I was any kind of stellar athlete, but even in the situations in sports or other pursuits where I had a chance to really shine, there was a way in which I kind of held back because I was like, it's going to cost me a friend. And when I did win, I felt funny. I didn't know how to express that joy, right? Would this make somebody else feel worse? It was very confusing. And I didn't like that idea, right? That my gain, whatever good feelings I was feeling, likely came at the cost of somebody feeling the opposite. So there's a way, right, in which competition can be set up such that it turns two people toward each other in a zero-sum competition, a gain for one, a loss for the other. And that dynamic, when it gets really locked in and intense, can become hateful, it can become obsessive, it can become mean, right? It can call forward most of the worst human characteristics. In fact, we can lose such sight of it that we become so myopically focused on just tearing somebody down that we even forget the part about lifting ourselves up. We can completely forget what matters. So that's where competition can go in a very dark way. So if we know that on one hand it arouses energy and can lead us to creativity and even sometimes joy, and on the other hand, it can bring out all of our worst characteristics, hatred, malice, revenge, cruelty. How do you guide it towards something positive? In this tradition and in many others, the instruction is to look inward. No surprise there. In the Buddhist teachings, the texts suggest that you will find what the Buddha called mana in Pali, often translated as the word conceit. And the specific conceit is this mistaken belief that I am, that there's a fixed me, I am something. But in this case specifically, I am better, I am the same, or I am worse than you. Not just I hit that ball better, not just I got higher scores in the piano competition, not just I make more money than you, but something in me is fundamentally better or worse. I lost the game and something about me is inferior. There's a way in which we hold it in our core. The Buddha even cautioned against I am the same, right? He said that is not a viable out, right? Let's all make the same money and then we can all just say we're the same. Or the millennial, everybody wins and gets a trophy mentality. That still relies on this conceit of I am. And I am something fixed relative to you as something fixed as well. So the Buddha encouraged people to investigate inwardly and feel that kind of notice and see and feel that I am, that habit of the mind to take a transient experience and turn it into a fixed belief about who we are. For those of you who find this difficult, the Buddha also said this was one of the last habits of mind to leave on the path of spiritual growth and progress. So if it doesn't go away by the end of this talk, you're in good company. But that doesn't mean you can start to loosen it up. You can start to see it. You can start to work it. You can start to investigate it and push back on it a little. Right? Your neighbor might drive a nicer car or vacation somewhere more exotic, or have a kid whose problems seem much better than your kid's problems, right? But to take that as a reflection of some intrinsic measure of who you are, right? That's the part that starts to wear us down and to send us into that dark side of competition. Karen Horney, the founder of feminist psychology, or one of the founders of feminist psychology, argued that hyper-competitiveness, which we see this pattern tremendously in the United States, extreme competitiveness, right? I mean, people are sending their kids in this area to like travel ice hockey teams at the age of 7 years old, right? It's insane because they want them to go to a college, right? So it's not just about winning the hockey game. Actually, in some ways, that's only like a small step on this much larger, right, competitive road to get your kid into an Ivy League school so that they can get the job at the PE firm, so that they can make tons of money, take the vacation, and then you can tell your neighbor about it, right? That's the long play here. And she said that this sense of hyper-competitiveness, right, stems no surprise, from a deep feeling of inferiority. And for actually most of us, if you're really going to look at the core conceit that we're carrying, it's not I am better, right? What Tara Brach likes to call the trance of unworthiness. That most of us are carrying around the belief that I am worse. I am not good enough. I am not okay, right? I am deficient. I am bad. And so we are in this intense external struggle to prove to other people, but hopefully in doing so to ourselves, that that is not the case. And so a big part of undoing this hyper-competitiveness or of transforming the negative energy of competition into positive is to come into contact with that belief. To sit with yourself long enough, to pay attention inwardly enough that you really feel how long you've been carrying it and how painful it is. Right? Feel it. Feel what it's like when you believe that you're not so good. When you believe that you're inferior or don't deserve love and attention. Feel that feeling. Let yourself come into contact with it. Let it move from the peripheries of your consciousness right into the full light of awareness and soften around it and just sense, right? It's like looking at a wound that you've had for ages and you finally take the bandage off and you take it in, you look at it. Oh man, that thing needs a washing. It's getting kind of pussy and gross. It's been festering there. Like, let's really take it in. It smells. So you let yourself feel it. And as you do that, as you look at it and feel it, you start to see the different pieces that have been tangled up in it. Oh, part of this, came from certain people maybe in my life saying things to me in a way that was painful or that I took in or that I needed to believe in order to not set myself up for some kind of embarrassing failure. At least that's what I thought, right? Other pieces you see have just come maybe because you were born into a body or a skin color or a gender, right, that has just gotten the message over and over and over again in 1,000 different ways that it doesn't belong and isn't okay. Or maybe you look at this wound, right, and you realize that there were actually just some pivotal moments in your life when you made a decision or did a thing or fell short in a way that just feels so hard to let go of. All these different ways that that wound forms and deepens. So you start to look at it and feel the weight of it and feel the pain of it. And as you hold it in your awareness and you explore it and you massage it and you bring some gentleness to it and you let the body soften around it, slowly insight starts to arise. And if the Buddhist teachings are correct, if the Buddhist hypothesis is correct, even if psychology and our sort of modern concept of therapy is correct, we start to see that this belief isn't entirely true, right? Yes, it's been there for a long time. Yes, it got formed for some very real and painful experiences. But that actually who we are isn't fixed. That we're constantly changing in these dynamic minds and bodies. And that every day we're showing up in new and different ways, right? Some of which are helpful and kind and feel good and even feel successful. And some days, right, we feel like we fall woefully short, right? But that it's an ongoing process. And as we start to shift from that idea of a fixed me who's bad, usually, or even, right, sometimes people have both. They flip back and forth between a fixed me who's bad and a fixed me who's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But either way, as we start to move beyond that, just to see that in every moment we're getting to make some choices about how we show up and what matters and what feels good and what really generates a sense of self-esteem. that wound starts to heal and we start to live a bit differently, and that competitive energy starts to transform. I talked about this a few weeks ago. In early Buddhist teachings, jealousy is often held sort of in contrast to this attitude of mudita, or rejoicing in the gain of others, right? And they're sort of seen as one grows, the other one falls. And this starts to happen, right? In competition, we find that we stop becoming jealous of the person we're in competition with, and we start actually feeling okay about their success. We start to see them as a being like us who is doing their best with the cards they've been dealt, and trying to make the most of it, right? That's what we're all doing. And so you can root for them to make the most of their hand, and root for yourself to make the most of your hand, and even enjoy the fact, right, that at times those efforts come into conflict, right? But it doesn't have to create these negative feelings of jealousy, of cruelty, of malice. Another way of describing this is that this competitive energy becomes transmuted into emulation. This is a concept that Aristotle put forward. That we start going from seeing ourselves as in conflict with someone to actually taking in what they're doing well and trying to learn from it. If you've ever experienced this shift, you know how liberating it can be. So I'll use a current example from my life. I've been working slowly on a large writing project. It's taking shape into a book about how I practice therapy and how these Buddhist teachings weave into that, and how the whole thing kind of sits in my mind. And for the early months of this project, I was so like locked in this belief that somebody else was going to get to my ideas first and write it before me. And when I looked at that, when I looked even deeper into that, I saw that I had staked so much of my sense of who I was on getting this thing done. That like if I was on my deathbed and I never got to write this book, and I didn't get the praise and the accolades and the big, well-populated book signings that came with it, that this life was not going to amount to much, and that my sort of permanent who I am was going to be a failure, right? This was the thing that would either prove to me that what people had said that I had potential was right or wrong. It's just terrifying to think that somebody could take that away from me, because then who would I be? As I looked at this, it started to seem not totally true. But also, I felt how painful it is and has been to live a life, right? Needing something like that to tell me that I'm okay. And I knew that the shift was starting to happen because all of a sudden the thought arose in my mind, why don't you listen to some of the other good writers' books and see how they did it? Why don't you pay attention to some of the other people in your field who are doing well right now and deconstruct what they're doing? You don't have to do what they're doing, but look at it. Take it in. Notice the people who are actually right next to you, right? And instead of hating on them and trying to block them out or beat them to the punch by racing through your work with that energy, right? If they've already claimed space, build on it. And that was so wonderful. And all of a sudden, writing became easier and creativity became easier and more started flowing out of it. And it felt like instead of being against the world and having to protect myself from something awful inside, I'm part of this nice, big, creative dance. And it's likely, truth be told, that my book will be like most people's books and not get read. But I'm really having fun writing it right now, right? It has changed. The fundamental nature of this process has shifted. So here's my invitation to you. If you find yourself lost in this competitive dynamic, right, rooting against other people, feeling tight, ask yourself the question, what do I believe about who I am if I lose? Who am I? What does that make me if I lose? Does it make me a loser? Does it make me a has-been, a nothing, a failure? Right? What is that fixed conceit of mana that my mind is creating and believing about this competition? And you might even come in, what does my body feel like when I'm believing that? Do I feel small and little, right? Uneasy, queasy? And sit with that. You might ask yourself how long you've been carrying that feeling around for at the periphery of your consciousness. And if it feels okay, you might invite it in, make a little space. My guess is it's an old feeling. And so much of what we do when we practice meditation, we soften and we soften and we feel and we soften, right? These instructions over and over again for this exact reason. So when you come up against that painful belief, you soften and you feel, and you soften and you feel. And you look at it and you notice the thoughts that percolate. And with time, you might start to see that who you are is not fixed, that that belief is fundamentally just not true. It's painful. It's been there for a long time. It's hard to shake sometimes, but it's not true. And it starts to loosen up. Because you are a dynamic process that is learning and evolving and making choices and discovering the consequences of these choices. Right? You are an ongoing process. And you, like every single other person, is trying your best to live this human life, right, in some way that feels okay. You're not sitting here in the balance of some great and final judgment. That's just not how it works. Every day, right, is a new chance to learn and grow. And when you start to see that, your enemies disappear and they become your teachers and sometimes even your friends. And you start to feel whole and at peace in this dance with all of them. So I'll stop there. Give everybody a second to let that just rest. All right. So we'll get into small groups, but before we do, any questions off the top?
Who won the card game?
Who won the card game? I did not. I didn't win the card game. Yeah, and actually, the really funny thing is I ended up trying to win the card game. And I still lost. So I don't know what lesson I learned there. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Oh, wait, we have a microphone so that people online can hear you.
Pull on Zoom there. Offline.
thank you for that. It was really on point. And a question, a concept I'm familiar with that's about your inner judge, and that your inner judge judges three things. It judges yourself, it judges other people, and then it judges circumstances. So I'm wondering if you can share perspective on inner talk that isn't so much about judging oneself or judging oneself in comparison to other people, but judging one's circumstances. And when sometimes inner talk isn't so much around I'm not measuring up or I'm not good enough or there's something fundamentally flawed about me, but I am in circumstances that seem unlucky compared to others, despite talent and effort.
Sure. Tell me if this lands. But in my experience, from watching myself and some people close to me, that habit of telling myself I am lucky, unlucky, usually, actually, as the case may be, right? There are plenty of ways I'm lucky, but that's not usually right? Is usually another way of trying to prop up that feeling of inferiority, right? If I can say I have it harder, right? I'm in this race, except I have a rusty bicycle and you all have nice ones. I'm trying to tell myself, right, that the race is fundamentally unfair. And so I'm doing really great. And I kind of want people to know that a little bit, right? Does that connect for you at all?
Yeah, that's very insightful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's usually where that fits in. But eventually, if I look at it, it all comes back to that original conceit of not wanting to be the inferior, bad, or outcast one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have something that kind of perked me up that Josh had said, and it was the competition, but it was the act of trying. Whether you win or lose, the act of trying was something that could feed, but then not ever having tried, there's sort of a like, darn, it would have maybe been better to try and lose the competition than never try. And I thought, maybe really think about the things that I've really tried hard to do in my life, and I may or may not have been very successful, but I tried hard a lot, and yeah, I got left behind a lot, but I'm so glad because I know it made me stronger, all the trying.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Could you all hear that back there? Oh, okay. I could hear it so well. So what she said was that her partner had really brought up this idea that one of the things in retrospect that sort of competition can do for us sometimes is it can, or at least a wholesome aspect of it, maybe is a better way of putting it, is the trying, right? That when we reflect on competitions, often what feels good is that we made an effort, right? That we showed up to try to do something for ourselves. We were willing to take a risk, right? We were willing to face uncertainty and muster our talents and our resources and our creativity to try to do something, right? And that reflecting on that effort put forward can feel very good. Am I getting this right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And then on the flip side, sometimes, right, we can be so afraid of that feeling of shame or loss or inferiority or the confirmation of something we already believe about ourselves that we don't even try, right? We don't engage, right? And we can sort of hide from competition because it feels like, right, it could confirm those feelings or reinforce those negative feelings. And so that's an interesting side of it too. Yeah, and that doesn't feel good. That most people, when they look back, don't feel great about having avoided competition altogether, right? That in a way, that's like stepping off the dance floor completely. Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, right? That we almost need that wholesome energy, right? To cut ourselves off from it in the name of not competing is to cut off something like really essential about our humanity. Yeah. Thank you. Both.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other observations, insights, thoughts? Got one behind you there, Neil.
First of all, Devin, thank you for the talk. It really resonated.
Yeah.
And it came up in the group discussion about the notion of comparing mind and how much is it the same thing as what we're talking about, competition, or maybe it's of a slight variation of it. I've certainly noticed a lot of comparing mind that I do to myself almost like a number. Like I look at these people who I went to college with and this famous person or that famous person, or friends of mine now who are achieving certain heights in their careers and professions. And I may, not on that level or whatever, but is it just really the same kind of concept or a special variant of it? One of our someone in the group mentioned the concept of mana, which I didn't really know what that means. I think you may have just referred to it, but anyway, so that's the basic question.
That's a great question. So, yeah. Look, our minds are really good at comparing, and it is a wildly useful feature, right? We need, like, one of the things human beings do so well, right, is we can hold two things up against each other and notice minute differences and discern causes and effects and the state of the natural world and how things came to be, right? It's like one of our superpowers, right? So the comparing mind is not a bad mind, right? You know, my kids get Highlights magazine. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Highlights, but they have 2 pages on it, you know, tell the differences between these 2 pages, right? Like, we actually want to foster the comparing mind. It's really useful to look at your colleague and say, how did they end up there and I ended up here? Some of it may be merit-based, some of it may be that they're a Nepo baby, right? Or that they have the right color skin or what, you know. But it's useful to understand how things come to be the way they are. The problem boils down to this idea of mana, this conceit, that somehow those comparisons tell us something about our essential nature, right? That's where we get into trouble. It's okay to notice that somebody else makes more money, right? It's okay to notice that somebody else got the job, even the job that we wanted, right? It's okay to feel feelings. But where the mind can really sort of turn on itself and create more harm is to then take those feelings and those observations and internalize them as a reflection of our true nature. Right? That's where we get hurt. Is that helpful, Joe? Awesome. Thanks. We're almost there. Time for a little one if there's any questions remaining, or we can move to wrap up. All right. Go for it.
I just wonder, I mean, this idea of competition, obviously there's a universal component to it. However, I wonder if you had many rooms filled with people from different countries, whose societies may have passed down these expectations that might be different than our own, if the responses would have been different. I mean, I would think they would have. I also think there's a lot of gender differences here too. Anyway, just wondered what your thought. It's not a question, it's just a thought.
It's a good thought. Look, if we're operating on the premise that there are ways to transform these into wholesome energies for us as people, it would seem to follow to me that there are also ways to transform these into more wholesome dynamics as a society. And from there, I would imagine that some societies have made more progress on that front than others, right? So yeah, I do think probably if we were to sit down and see different societies, we'd notice that I think my guess would be that they all have these energies in them, but some of them manifest in ways that are more wholesome, right? Cultures built on emulation and respect, right? And trying to take the best of people who are successful or of an elevated status and internalize that and work towards it, right? Versus societies that are built more on tearing each other down, right? Infighting, that sort of thing. Yeah, that seems like in schools, sure, yeah. But it seems like a very reasonable thing to suppose. Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And maybe we're working towards something a little more wholesome. On that note, one of the best things about doing this together in community is that you get to practice one of these fundamental behaviors that makes us feel good, which is the behavior of giving and receiving. And in the most important way, by being here together and listening to each other, you have both given and received. And so what I'd invite you to do is turn to somebody sitting next to you and thank them for being here.